I do. Sorry. Like dead silence. The stream is blocking the take a photo button. Hello. Just taking a photo of the map that's in this book. Reading Chronicles of Narnia in the chronological order, not the publishing order. And we have reached Voyage of the Dawn Treader. Which, as a kid, I always, for some reason, read it as Voyage of the Dawn Treader. Which feels very much something that Terry Pratchett would do. Regular name, but give it a weird, eccentric flourish to the pronunciation. And sending the photo over to Hero that he can put it on the stream. It's legible. Legible. Lands of the North, Narnia, Paravel, Terabithia. So, people who aren't on Madland hear me. I'm just blathering about nothing. No, it was just, well, I was reading the map, admittedly. Which I still want you to put on the book thing. Get there faster. Hey, getting there is what we're doing with this book. It's a voyage book. They're traveling, which, if you remember, I'll mention it in the, oh, okay, yeah. Oh, should I say it now for the, because we're ad space, or should I wait till we're out of the ad space? I mean, you can hear me if we're in the VODs. No, but when you upload the videos later to YouTube. Technically. I just got really excited about it, is all. I am drinking a drink And unlike the summer drinks, which tended to be slushies, it is winter. I made a matcha latte. It's mostly just heated milk, sugar with matcha powder, and a little bit of vanilla. I guess it's a vanilla matcha latte. It's very warming and nice. The map. Error sharing my watch stream. Nobody cares. The hand grabby book, the hand grabby map. Give me the book, give me the map. Adds progress 14. I see. Okay. I don't remember their names though, so I'm pretty much just gonna call them the old guys. You told me to wait because not to talk about it right now. Okay. So, in The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, there is a scene that will come up later on in the book where you're gonna see a whole bunch of people asleep at a table. Those people are the men, those, I don't remember if they called them princes or whatnot, that we heard them talking about during The Horse and His Boy. When they were sent overseas to go on no wait, was it The Horse and His Boy? Oh no, now I don't remember. It was at some point where it was like, oh no, it might have actually been in the last book we just read, Prince Caspian. Because it was like they couldn't do anything to stop the evil guy Mirez, because the evil King Mirez, because some of the men, I can't remember if they were counselors or if they were like nobles or kingsmen or something, were sent over the seas to go and try to explore into the east. It can't have been Mirez though, because they had the there was no seafaring anymore. When were they sent? Oh gosh, no, I don't remember. Oh no, it's gonna bother me. Oh man. I want to say that it was during The Horse and His Boy, because I feel like they were discussing it about who can help with defense, but maybe it was... It was a long time ago. They might mention it when we get into that section of the book. I dropped my bookmark. Oh well. Anyways, we will start the new book, Voyage of the Dawn Treader. Okay, so credits to Joffrey Barfield. Well, there's even a map of the Dawn Treader. I wish I could share this. Should I share this too? I should share this. I don't know if Cathis can... Where did the map go? You get rid of the map. And I will send you... Where are you? Here's my Discord. I don't know if you can fit this as well on there. They've got a photo of the boat and all the things on the boat. Plan of the Dawn Treader. Oops, I closed my phone. I need that for... I can see what people are saying. But we'll get reading in just a second. Sorry. Screen. There we go. Okay. Put my phone down. Okay. Chapter 1. Picture in the bedroom. There was a boy called Eustace Clarence Scrubb, and he almost deserved it. His parents called him Eustace Clarence, and masters called him Scrubb. I can't tell you how his friends spoke to him, for he had none. He didn't call his father and mother, but Harold and Alberta. They were very up-to-date and advanced people. They were vegetarians, non-smokers, and teetotalers, and wore a special kind of underclothes. In their house, there was very little furniture and very few clothes on beds, and the windows were always open. Just as Clarence liked animals, especially beetles, if they were dead and pinned on a card. He liked books if they were books of information, and he had pictures of grain elevators or of fat foreign children doing exercises in model schools. Just as Clarence disliked his cousins, the four Evanses. I didn't know that was their last name. Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy. He was quite glad when he heard that Edmund and Lucy were coming to stay, for deep down inside him, he liked bossing and bullying, and though he was a punny little person who couldn't have stood up to even Lucy, let alone Edmund, in a fight, he knew that there are dozens of ways to give people a bad time if you are in your own home and they are only visitors. Edmund and Lucy did not at all want to come and stay with Uncle Harold and Aunt Alberta, but it really couldn't be helped. Father had got a job lecturing in America for 16 weeks that summer, and Mother was to go with him because he hadn't a real holiday because she hadn't had a real holiday for 10 years. Peter was working very hard for an exam, and he was to spend the holidays being coached by an old Professor Kirk, in whose house these four children had had wonderful adventures long ago in the war years. If he had still been in that house, he would have had them all to stay. But he had somehow become poor since the old days and was living in a small cottage with only one bedroom to spare. It would have cost too much money to take the other three all to America, and so only Susan had gone. Grown-ups thought her the pretty one of the family, and she was no good at schoolwork, though otherwise very old for her age, and Mother said she would get far more out of a trip to America than the youngsters. Edmund and Lucy tried not to grudge Susan her luck, but it was dreadful having to spend the summer holidays at their aunt's. "But it's far worse for me," said Edmund, "because you'll all at least have a room of your own, and I'll have to share a bedroom with that record stinker, Eustace." The story begins on an afternoon when Edmund and Lucy were stealing a few precious minutes alone together, and of course they were talking about Narnia, which was the name of their very own private and secret country. Most of us, I suppose, have a secret country, but for most of us, it is only an imaginary country. Edmund and Lucy were luckier than other people in that respect. Their secret country was real. They had already visited it twice, not in a game or a dream, but in reality. They had gone there by course of magic, which is the only way of getting to Narnia. And a promise, or a very nearly a promise, had been made them in Narnia itself, that they would someday get back. You may imagine that they had talked about it a good deal when they got the chance. They were in Lucy's room, sitting on the edge of her bed and looking at a picture on the opposite wall. It was the only picture in the house that they liked. Aunt Alberta didn't like it at all. That's why it was put away in a little back room upstairs. But she couldn't get rid of it because it had been a wedding present from someone she did not want to offend. It was a picture of a ship sailing straight towards you. Her prow was gilded and shaped like the head of a dragon with an wide open mouth. She had only one mast and one large square sail, which was a rich purple. The sides of the ship, what you could see of them, were the gilded wings of the dragon. Oh my goodness. The sides of the ship. The sides of the ship. I lost my spot. What you could see of them were the gilded wings of the dragon. Why am I not able to read this? The sides of the ship, what you could see of them, where the gilded wings of the dragon ended, were green. Got through it. She had just run up to the top of one glamorous wave, and the nearest slope of that wave came down towards you, with streaks and bubbles on it. She was obviously running fast before a gay wind, listing over a little on her port side. By the way, if you're going to read the story at all, and if you don't know already, you've better get into your head that the left of a ship when you're looking ahead is port, and the right is starboard. All the sunlight fell on... 1 second. Pardon me. A different reading spot, so the mic is a little bit and I thought I could read while looking with my head to the left, and it was not working. Let's try this. All of the sunlight fell on her from that side, and the water on that side was full of greens and purples. On the other, it was a darker blue from the shadow of the ship. "The question is," said Edmund, "whether it doesn't make things worse looking at Narnia's ship when you can't get there." "Even looking is better than nothing," said Lucy, "and she is such a very Narnian ship." "Still playing your old games," said Eustace Clarence, who had been listening outside the door and now came grinning into the room. Last year, when he had been staying with the Pevensies, he had managed to hear them all talking of Narnia, and he loved teasing them about it. He thought, of course, that they were making it all up, and as he was far too stupid to make anything up himself, he did not approve of that. "You're not wanted here," said Edmund curtly. "I'm trying to think of a limerick," said Eustace, "something like this. Some kids who played games about Narnia got gradually balmier and Narnia got gradually balmier and balmier. Well, Narnia and balmier don't rhyme to begin with." "It's an assonant," said Eustace. "Don't ask him what an assy the thingy gummy is," said Edmund. "He's only longing to be asked. Say nothing and perhaps he'll go away." Most boys, on meeting a reception like this, would either have cleared out or flared up. Eustace did neither. He just hung about grinning and presently began talking again. "Do you like that picture?" he asked. "For heaven's sake, don't let him get started about art and all that," said Edmund hurriedly. But Lucy, who was very truthful, had already said, "Yes, I do. I like it very much." "It's a rotten picture," said Eustace. "You won't see it if you step outside," said Edmund. "Why do you like it?" said Eustace to Lucy. "Well, for one thing," said Lucy, "I like it because the ship looks as if it really were moving, and the water looks as if it were really wet, and the waves look as if they were really going up and down." Of course, Eustace knew lots of answers to this, but he didn't say anything. The reason was that at that very moment he looked at the waves and saw that they did look very much indeed as if they were going up and down. He had only once been in a ship, and then only as far as the Isle of Wight, and had been horribly seasick. The look of the waves in the picture made him feel sick again. He turned rather green and tried another look, and then all three children were staring with open mouths. Where they were seeing may be hard to believe when you read it on print, but it was almost as hard to believe when you saw it happening. The things in the pictures were moving. It didn't look at all like a cinema either. The colors were too real and clean out of the doors for that. Down went the prow of the ship into the waves, and up went a great shock of spray. And then up went the wave behind her, and her stern and her deck became visible for the first time, and then disappeared as the next wave came to meet her, and the bows went up again. At the same moment, an exercise book, which had been lying beside Edmund on the bed, flapped, rose, and sailed through the air to the wall behind him, and Lucy felt all of her hair whipping around her face as it does on a windy day. And this was a windy day, but the wind was blowing out of the picture towards them, and suddenly the wind came with the noises, the swishing of waves and the slap of water against the ship's sides, and the creaking, an overall high, steady roar of air and water. It was the smell, the wild, briny smell, which really convinced Lucy that she was not dreaming. "Stop it," came Eustace's voice, squeaky with fright and bad temper. "It's some silly trick you two are playing. Stop it. I'll tell Alberta. Ow!" The other two were much more accustomed to adventures, but just exactly as Eustace Clarence said "ow," they both said "ow" too. The reason was that a great cold salt splash had broke right out of the frame and they were breathless from the smack of it, besides being wet through. Sorry, outside noises. Besides being wet through. "I'll smash the rotten thing," cried Eustace. And then several things happened at the same time. Eustace rushed towards the picture. Edmund, who knew something about magic, sprang after him, warning him to look out and not to be a fool. Lucy grabbed at him from the other side and was dragged forwards. By this time, either they had grown much smaller or the picture had grown larger. Eustace jumped to try to pull it off the wall and found himself standing on the frame. In front of him was not glass but real sea, and wind and waves rushing up to the frame as they might be to a rock. He lost his head and clutched at the other two who had jumped up beside him. There was a second of struggling and shouting, and just as they thought they had got their balance, a great blue roller surged up around them, swept them off their feet, and drew them down into the sea. Eustace, Eustace's despairing cry suddenly ended as the water got into his mouth. Lucy thanked her stars that she had worked hard at swimming in the summer term. It is true that she would have gotten much better if she had used a slower stroke, but also that the water felt a great deal colder than it looked when it was only a picture. Still, she kept her head and kicked her shoes off, as everyone ought to do as everyone ought to do who falls into deep water in their clothes. She even kept her mouth shut and her eyes open. They were still quite near the ship, and she saw its green side towering high above them, and people looking at her from the deck. Then, as one might have expected, Eustace clutched at her in a panic, and down they both went. When they came up again, she saw a white figure diving off the ship's side. Edmund was close beside her now, treading water, and had caught the arms of the howling Eustace. Then someone else, whose face was vaguely familiar, slipped an arm under her from the other side. There was a whole lot of shouting going on from the ship, heads crowding together above the bulwarks, ropes being thrown. Edmund and the stranger were fastening ropes around her. After that followed what seemed a very long delay, during which her face got blue and her teeth began chattering. In reality, the delay was not very long. They were waiting till the moment when she could get on board the ship without being dashed against its side. Even with all of their best endeavors, she had a bruised knee when she finally stood, dripping and shivering on the deck. After her, Edmund was heaved up, and then the miserable Eustace. Last of all came the stranger, a golden-headed boy some years older than herself. Caspian, gasped Lucy as soon as she had breath enough. Caspian it was. Caspian, the boy king of Narnia whom they had helped to set on the throne during their last visit. Immediately, Edmund recognized him too. All three shook hands and clapped one another on the back with great delight. "But who is your friend?" said Caspian almost at once, turning to Eustace with a cheerful smile. But Eustace was crying much harder than any boy his age has a right to cry when nothing worse than wetting has happened to him, and would only yell, let me go back, I don't like it." "Let you go," said Caspian, "but where?" Eustace rushed to the ship's side, as if he expected to see the picture frame hanging above the sea, and perhaps a glimpse of Lucy's bedroom. What he saw was blue waves flecked with foam, and a paler blue sky, both spreading without a break to the horizon. Perhaps we can hardly blame him if his heart sank. He was promptly sick. "Hey, Rhinef," said Caspian to one of the sailors, "bring spiced wine for their majesties. You'll need something to warm you up after that dip." He called Edmund and Lucy their majesties because they, and Peter and Susan, had all been kings and queens of Narnia long before his time. Narnian time flows differently from ours. If you spend 100 years in Narnia, you would still come back to our world at the very same hour of the very same day on which you left. And then, if you went back to Narnia after spending a week here, you might find that 1,000 Narnian years had passed, or only a day, or no time at all. You never know till you get there. Consequently, when the Pevensey children had returned to Narnia last time for their second visit, it was, for the Narnians, as if King Arthur came back to Britain, as some people say he will. And I say the sooner the better. Rhinef returned with the spiced wine steaming in a flagon and 4 silver cups. It was just what one wanted, and as Lucy and Edmund sipped it, they could feel the warmth going right down to the toes. But Eustace made faces and sputtered and spat it out and was sick again, began to cry again, and asked if they hadn't any plump trees vitaminized nerve food, and could it be made with distilled water, and anyway he insisted on being put ashore at the next station. "This is a merry shipmate you've brought us, brother," whispered Caspian to Edmund with a chuckle. But before he could say anything more, Eustace burst out again. "Oh, what on earth is that? Take it away, the horrid thing!" He really had some excuse this time for feeling a little surprised. Something very curious indeed had come out of the cabin in the poop, and was slowly approaching them. You might call it, and indeed it was, a mouse. Then it was a mouse on its hind legs, and stood about 2 feet high. A thin band of gold passed round its head under one ear and over the other, and in this was stuck a long crimson feather. As the mouse's fur was very dark, almost black, the effect was bold and striking. Its left paw rested on the hilt of a sword very nearly as long as its tail. Its balance, as it paced gravely along the swaying deck, was perfect, its manners courtly. Lucy and Edmund recognized it at once. Reepicheep, the most valiant of all the talking beasts of Narnia, and the chief mouse. He had won undying glory in the second battle of Baruna. Lucy longed, as she had always done, to take Reepicheep up in her arms and cuddle him, but this, as she well knew, was a pleasure she could never have. It would have offended him deeply. Instead, she went down on one knee to talk to him. Reepicheep put forwards his left leg, drew back his right, bowed, kissed her hand, straightened himself, twirled his whiskers, and said in his shrill, piping voice, "My humble duty to your majesty, and to King Edmund too." Here he bowed again. "Nothing except your majesty's presence was lacking to this glorious venture." "Ugh, take it away," wailed Eustace. "I hate mice, and I never could bear performing animals. They're silly and vulgar and sentimental." "Am I to understand," said Reepicheep to Lucy after a long stare at Eustace, "that this singularly discourteous person is under your majesty's protection? Because if not—" At this moment, Lucy and Edmund both sneezed. What a fool I am to keep you all standing here in your wet things," said Caspian. "Come on below and get changed. I'll give you my cabin, of course, Lucy. No, sorry. I'll give you my cabin, of course, Lucy, but I'm afraid we have no women's clothes on board. You'll have to make do with some of mine. Lead the way, Reepicheep. That's a good fella." "To the convenience of a lady," said Reepicheep, "even a question of honor must give way, at least for the moment." And here he looked very hard at Eustace. The Caspian hustled them on, and in a few minutes Lucy found herself passing through the door into the stern cabin. She fell in love with it at once. The 3 square windows that looked out on the blue swirling water astern, the low cushioned benches round the 3 sides of the table, the swinging silver lamp overhead, dwarf work she knew at once by its exquisite delicacy, and the flat gold image of Aslan the lion on the forward wall above the door. All of this she took in a flash. Caspian immediately opened a door on the starboard side and said, "This'll be your room, Lucy. I'll just get some dry things for myself." He was rummaging in one of the lockers while he spoke, "and then leave you to change. If you'll fling your wet things out the door, I'll get them taken to the galley to be dried." Lucy found herself as much at home as if she had been in Caspian's cabin for weeks. The motion of the ship did not worry her, for in the old days, when she had been a queen in Narnia, she had done a good deal of voyaging. The cabin was very tiny, but bright with painted panels, all birds and beasts and crimson dragons and vines, and spotlessly clean. Caspian's clothes were too big for her, but she could manage. Her shoes, sandals, and sea boots were hopelessly big. His shoes, sandals, and sea boots. But she did not mind going barefoot on board ship. When she had finished dressing, she looked out of her window at the water rushing past and took a long, deep breath. She felt quite sure they were in for a lovely time. Chapter 2. On Board the Dawn Treader. "Ah, there you are, Lucy," said Caspian. "We were just waiting for you. This is my captain, Lord Drinian." A dark-haired man went down on one knee and kissed her hand. The only others present were Reepicheep and Edmund. "Where's Eustace?" asked Lucy. "In bed," said Edmund. "But I don't think we can do anything for him. It only makes him worse if you try to be nice to him." "Meanwhile," said Caspian, "we want to talk." "By Jove, we do," said Edmund. "And first, about time. It's a year ago by our time since we left you, just before your coronation. How long has it been in Narnia?" "Exactly 3 years," said Caspian. "All going well?" asked Edmund. "You don't suppose I'd have left my kingdom and put to sea unless all was well," answered the king. "It couldn't be better. There's no trouble at all now between Telmarians, dwarves, talking beasts, fauns, and the rest. And we gave those troublesome giants on the frontier such a good beating last summer that they pay us tribute now. And I had an excellent person to leave as regent while I'm away, Trumpkin the dwarf. You remember him?" "Dear Trumpkin," said Lucy. "Of course I do. You couldn't have made a better choice." "Loyal as a badger, ma'am, and valiant as a mouse," said Strinian. Sorry. He'd been going to say as a lion, but had noticed Reepicheep's eyes fixed on him. "And where are we headed for?" asked Edmund. "Well," said Caspian, "it's rather a long story. Perhaps you remember that when I was a child, my usurping uncle Murez got rid of 7 friends of my father's, who might have taken my part, by sending them off to explore the unknown eastern seas beyond the Lone Islands." "Yes," said Lucy. "And none of them ever came back." "Right. Well, on my coronation day, with Aslan's approval, I swore an oath that if once I established peace in Narnia, I would sail east myself for a year and a day to find my father's friends or to learn of their deaths and avenge them if I could. These were their names: the Lord Revilian, the Lord Byrne, the Lord Argos, the Lord Mavramorn, the Lord Octasian, the Lord Restamar, and, that other one who's so hard to remember." "The Lord Roop, sire," said Drinian. Roop, of course," said Caspian. "That is my main intention. But Reepicheep here has an even higher hope." Everyone's eyes turned to the mouse.
As high as my spirit, he says, though perhaps as small as my stature. Why should we not come to the very eastern end of the world? And what might we find there? I expect to find Aslan's own country. It is always from the east, across the sea, that the great lion comes to us.
I say that is an idea, said Edmund in an odd voice. Odd voice, not odd.
But do you think, said Lucy, Aslan's country would be that sort of country? I mean, the sort you could ever sail to? I do not know, madam, said Reepicheep, but there is this. When I was in my cradle, a wood woman, a dryad, spoke this verse over me. Where sky and water meet, where the waves grow sweet, doubt not, Reepicheep, to find all you seek, there is the utter east. I do not know what it means, but the spell of it has been on me all my life.
After a short silence, Lucy asked, And where are we now, Caspian? The captain can tell you better than I, said Caspian. So Drinian got out his chart and spread it on the table. That's our position, he said, laying his finger on it. It was at noon today. We have a fair wind from Caraparavel and stood a little north of Galame, which we made on the next day. We were in port for a week, where the Duke of Galma made a great tournament for his majesty, and there he unhorsed many knights and got a few nasty falls myself, Drinian. Some of the bruises are there still, put in Caspian. And unhorsed many knights, repeated Drinian with a grin. We thought the Duke would have been pleased if King Majesty would have married his daughter, but nothing came of that. Squints had a... What? Squints and has freckles. Oh. What's wrong with freckles? Freckles are cute, said Caspian. Oh, poor girl, said Lucy. And we sailed from Galma, continued Drinian, and ran into calm for the best part of 2 days and had to row. Then had a wind again and did not make Terebinthia till the 4th day from Galma.
You got the map up, love.
The map of the areas that they're traveling through that he's mentioning. Like we're talking about all these locations. We sailed from Galma, continued Drinian, and ran into calm for the better part of 2 days and had to row. And then had wind again, did not make Terebinthia till the 4th day from Galma. And their king sent out a warning not to land, for there is sickness in Terebinthia. But we doubled the cape and put it in a little creek far from the city and watered. Then we had to lie off for 3 days before we got southeast wind and stood out for the 7 Isles. The 3rd day out a pirate, Terebinthian by her rig, overhauled us. But when she saw us well armed, she stood off after some shooting of arrows on either part.
And we ought to have given her chase and boarded her and hanged every mother's son of them, said Reepicheep.
And in 5 days more we were inside of Mully, which, as you know, in the westernmost of the 7 Isles. Then we rode through the straits and came about sundown into Redhaven, into the Isle of Bren, and where we were very lovingly feasted and had victuals and water at will. We left Redhaven 6 days ago, and have made marvelously good speed, so that I hope to see the Lone Isles the day after tomorrow. Sum is, we're now nearly 30 days at sea, and have sailed 9 more than 400 leagues from Narnia.
And after the Lone Islands, said Lucy.
No one knows, your majesty, answered Drinian, unless the Lone Islanders themselves can tell us. They couldn't in our day, said Edmund.
Then, said Reepicheep, it is after the Lone Islands that this adventure really begins.
Caspian now suggested that they might like to be shown over the ship before supper. But Lucy's conscience smote her, and she said,
I think I really must go see Eustace. Seasickness is horrid, you know. If I had my old cordial with me, I could cure him.
But you have, said Caspian. I had quite forgotten about it. As you left it behind, I thought it might be regarded as one of the royal treasures, and so I brought it. If you think it ought to be wasted on a thing like seasickness.
It'll only take a drop, said Lucy.
Caspian opened one of the lockers beneath the bench and brought out the beautiful little diamond flask which Lucy remembered so well. I mean, to be fair, it's hers. Like, I can see Caspian not using it unless it's to actually save someone's life, or maybe, prevent major maiming, like losing a limb, but
If Lucy wants to save somebody from seasickness, that's on her.
Right?
Santa gave it to me. I. She, yeah, she used it during the wars a couple times. So save like lots of wounds and stuff healed. But I mean, Aslan would want it used, so. And if she purposely avoided using it when somebody's misery because it might be more useful later, I feel like Aslan would not be happy about that. Right? Because it's less, I feel like it's less about what you do. It's more like you know what you did is wrong, and making somebody suffer needlessly seems like something that she think is wrong. Anyways, diamond flask, which Lucy remembered so well. Take back your own, Queen, he said, then left the cabin and went out into the sunshine. In the deck there were two large, long hatches fore and aft of the mast, and both open, as they always were in fair weather, to let light and air into the belly of the ship. Caspian led them down. Can you swap it over to the map of the ship now? Ha ha ha. Making Cathis do all the work. Caspian led them down a ladder into the after hatch. Here they found themselves in a place where benches for rowing ran from side to side, and the light came in through the oar holes and danced on the roof. Of course, Caspian's ship was not that horrible thing, a galley rowed by slaves. Oars were used only when the wind failed, or for getting in and out of the harbor, and everyone, except Reepicheep, whose legs were too short, had often taken a turn. At each side of the ship, the space under the benches were left clear for rowers' feet, but all down the center there was a kind of pit, which went down to the very keel, and this was filled with all kinds of things: sacks of flour, casks of water and beer, barrels of pork, jars of honey, skin bottles of wine, apples, nuts, cheese, biscuits, turnips, sides of bacon. From the roof, that is, from under the side of the deck, hung hams and strings of onions, and also the men of also the men, what? Also the men of the watch off duty in their hammocks. Caspian led them aft, stepping from bench to bench. At least it was stepping for him, and sometimes between a step and a jump for Lucy, and a real long jump for Reepicheep. In this way they came to a partition with a door in it. Caspian opened the door and led them into a cabin which filled the stern underneath the deck cabins in the poop. It was, of course, not so nice. It was very low, and the sides sloped together as they went down, so that there was hardly any floor. And though it had windows and of thick glass, they were not made to open because they were under water. In fact, at this very moment, as the ship pitched, they were alternately golden with sunlight and dim green with the sea. You and I must lodge here, Edmund, said Caspian. We'll leave your kinsmen in the bunk and sling hammocks for ourselves. I beseech you, your majesty, said Drinian. No, shipmate, said Caspian. We have argued all that out already. You and Rince was the mate, are sailing the ship, and will have cares and labors many a night when we are singing catches or telling stories, so you and he must have port cabin above. King Edmund and I can lay very snugly here below. But how is the stranger? Eustace, very green in the face, scowled and asked whether there was any sign of the storm getting any less. The Caspian said, What storm? And Drinian burst out laughing. Storm, young master, he roared. This is as fair weather as a man could ask for. Who's that? Said Eustace irritably. Send him away. His voice goes through my head. I've brought you something that will make you feel better, Eustace, said Lucy. Oh, go away and leave me alone, growled Eustace. But he took a drop from her flask, and though he said it was beastly stuff, the smell in the cabin when she opened it was delicious. It is certain that his face came the right color a few moments after he had swallowed it, and he must have felt better, because instead of wailing about the storm in his head, he began demanding to be put ashore, and said that at the first port he would lodge a disposition against them all with the British Council. But when Reepicheep asked what a disposition was, and how you lodged it, Reepicheep thought it was some new way of arranging a single combat. Eustace could only reply, Fancy not knowing that. In the end, they succeeded in convincing Eustace that they were already sailing as fast as they could towards the nearest land they knew. and that they had no more power of sending him back to Cambridge, which was where Uncle Harold lived, than of sending him to the moon. After that, he sulkily agreed to put on the fresh clothes which had been put out for him and come on deck. Caspian now showed them over the ship, though indeed they had seen most of it already. They went up to the forecastle and saw the lookout standing on a little shelf inside the gilded dragon's neck and peering through its open mouth. Inside the forecastle was a galley, or ship's kitchen, and quarters for such people as the boatswain, the carpenter, the cook, and the master archer. If you think it odd to have the galley in the bows, and imagine the smoke from the chimney streaming back over the ship, that is because you are thinking of steamships, where there is always a headwind. On a sailing ship, the wind is coming from behind, and any... Yeah, I was thinking that, and that does answer that question. On a sailing ship, the wind is coming from behind, and anything smelly is put far forward as possible. They were taken up to the fighting top, and at first it was rather alarming to rock to and fro, there to see the deck looking small and far away beneath. Realized that if you fell, there was no particular reason why you should fall on board rather than in the sea. Then they were taken to the poop, where Rins was on duty, and another man at the great tiller. Behind that, the dragon's tail rose up, covered with gilding, and round inside it ran a little bench. The name of the ship was Dawn Treader. She was only a little bit of a thing compared to one of our ships, or even with the cogs, dromons, garricks, and galleons which Narnia had owned when Lucy and Edmund had reigned under High King Peter. For nearly all navigation had died out in the reigns of Caspian's ancestors. When his uncle Mirez the usurper had sent the Seven Lords to sea, they had to buy a Galliman ship and man it with hired Galmian sailors. But now Caspian had begun to teach the Narnians to be seafaring folk once more, and the Dawn Treader was the finest ship he had built yet. She was so small that, forward of the mast, there was hardly any deck room between the central hatch and the ship's boat on one side and the hen coop. Lucy fed the hens on the other. But she was a beauty of her kind, a lady, as sailors say, her lines perfect, her colors pure, and every spar and rope and pin lovingly made. Eustace, of course, would be pleased with nothing, and kept on boasting about liners and motorboats and aeroplanes and submarines, as if he knew anything about them, muttered Edmund. But the other two were delighted with the Dawn Treader, and when they returned aft to the cabin supper, and saw the whole western sky lit up with an immense crimson sunset, and felt the quiver of the ship and tasted the salt on their lips, and thought of unknown lands of the eastern rim of the world, Lucy felt that she was almost too happy to speak. What Eustace thought had best be told in his own words. I'm taking my glasses off. What Eustace thought had best be told in his own words, for when they all got their clothes back, dried next morning, he at once got a little black notebook and a pencil and started to keep a diary. He always had this notebook with him and kept a record of his marks in it. For though he didn't care much about any subject for his own sake, he cared a great deal about marks and would even go to people and say, "I got so much, what did you get?" But he didn't seem likely to get many marks in the Dawn Treader. He now started a diary. This was the first entry. Try a different sitting position. Pardonnez-moi. Pardonnez-moi. I'm gonna try a different sitting. This is a really awkward new place for. I'll mute this while I move things. Okay, can you... I'm not facing the mic, but I'm right next to it. Are you able... Am I still within... Okay, cool. Can you also turn off the ceiling light and put on the side light? Please. Bathroom light? I'm sorry. Just give me my eyes a minute to adjust from not like the power of the sun coming down from the ceiling. And I think I can read this fine. Why? We're on the ship. You just don't like the maps on the screen. It's fine. Okay, right. He was reading his journal. August 7th. Have now been 24 hours on the ghastly boat, if it isn't a dream. All the time, a frightful storm has been raging. It's a good thing I'm not seasick. Huge waves keep coming in over the front, and I've seen the boat nearly go under a number of times. All the others pretend to take no notice of this, either from swank or because Harold says one of the most cowardly things ordinary people do is shut their eyes to facts. It's madness to come out into the sea in a rotten little thing like this, not much bigger than a lifeboat, and of course, absolutely primitive indoors. No proper saloon, no radio, no bathrooms, no deck chairs. I was dragged all over it yesterday evening, and it would make nearly anyone sick to hear Caspian showing off his funny little toy boat as if it were the Queen Mary. I tried to tell him what real ships are like, but he's too dense. E and L, of course, didn't back me up. I suppose a kid like L doesn't realize the danger, and E is buttering up C as everyone does here. They call him a king. I said I was a Republican, but he had to ask me what that meant. He didn't seem to know anything at all. Needless to say, I've been put in the worst cabin of the boat, a perfect dungeon, and Lucy has been given a whole room on deck to herself. Almost a nice room compared to the rest of this. Place. C says that's because she's a girl. I tried to make him say what Albert says, that all of that sort of thing is really lowering girls. But he was too dense. Still, he might see that I shall be ill if I'm kept in this hole any longer. He says we mustn't grumble because C is sharing it with us himself to make room for L. As if that didn't make it more crowded and far worse. Nearly forgot to say that there is also a kind of mouse thing that gives everyone the most frightful cheek. The others can put up with it if they like, but I shall twist his tail pretty soon if he tries it on me. The food is frightful too. The trouble between Eustace and Reepicheep arrived even sooner than might have been expected. Before dinner that next day, when the others were sitting around the table waiting, being at sea gives one a magnificent appetite, Eustace came rushing in, wringing his hands and shouting out, "That little brute has half killed me! I insist on it being kept under control. I could bring an action against you, Caspian. I could order you to have it destroyed." At the same moment, Reepicheep appeared. His sword was drawn, and his whiskers looked very fierce, but he was polite as ever. "I ask your pardon all," he said, "and especially Her Majesty's. If I had known that he would take refuge here, I would have awaited a more reasonable time for his correction." "What on earth is up?" asked Edmund. What had really happened was this. Reepicheep, who never felt that the ship was getting on fast enough, loved to sit at the bulwarks forwards, just beside the dragon's head, gazing out into the eastern horizon and singing softly in his little chirruping voice the song of the Dryad had made for him. He never held on to anything. However, the ship pitched, and kept his balance with perfect ease. Perhaps his long tail hanging down to the decks inside the bulwarks made this easier. Everyone on board was familiar with this habit, and the sailors liked it because when one was on lookout duty, it gave one somebody to talk to. What exactly Eustace had slipped and reeled, why exactly Eustace had slipped and reeled and stumbled all the way forwards to the forecastle, he had not yet got his sea legs, I never heard. Perhaps he hoped he would see land, or perhaps he wanted to hang about the galley and scrounge something. Anyway, as soon as he saw the long tail hanging down, and perhaps it was rather tempting. He thought it would be delightful to catch hold of it, swing Reepicheep round by it once and twice upside down, then run away and laugh. At first, the plan seemed to work beautifully. The mouse was not much heavier than a very large cat. Eustace had him off the rail in trice, and very silly he looked, thought Eustace. I'm sorry, I'm so mad at this. You do not grab animals by their tails at all, because it's the vertebrae, like it's built similar to a spine, and you can like dislocate, and that's horrible. Their tails are not meant to carry their weight. Of course, some exceptions are made for certain animals who have lots of muscle around their tails, but like don't pick up cats and rats and mice and stuff by their tails. It's not good for them. At first, the plan seemed to work beautifully. The mouse was not much heavier than a very large cat. Eustace had him off the rail in a trice, and very silly he looked, though Eustace, with his little limbs all splayed out. Thought Eustace, with his little limbs all sprayed out and his mouth open. But unfortunately, Reepicheep, who had fought for his life many a time, never lost his head, even for a moment. Nor his skill. It's not very easy to draw one's sword when one is swinging around in the air by one's tail, but he did. And the next thing Eustace knew was 2 agonizing jabs in the hand, which made him let go of the tail, and the next thing after that was the little mouse had picked itself up again as if it were a ball bouncing off the deck, and there it was facing him, and a horrid, long, bright, sharp thing like a skewer was waving to and fro within an inch of his stomach. This doesn't count as below the belt for mice in Narnia, because they can hardly be expected to reach higher. Stop it, sputtered Eustace. Go away. Put that thing away. It's not safe. Stop it, I say. I'll tell Caspian. I'll have you muzzled and tied up. Why do you not draw your own sword, poltroon? Cheeped the mouse. Draw and fight, or I will beat you black and blue with the flat. I haven't got one, said Eustace. I'm a pacifist. I don't believe in fighting. Do I understand, said Reepicheep, withdrawing his sword for a moment and speaking very sternly, that you do not intend to give me satisfaction? I don't know what you mean, said Eustace, nursing his hand. If you don't know how to take a joke, then I shan't bother my head about you. Then take that, said Reepicheep, and that to teach you manners, and the respect due to a knight, and a mouse's tail. And at each word he gave Eustace a blow with the side of his rapier, which was thin, fine, dwarf-tempered steel, and as supple and effective as a birch rod. Eustace, of course, was at a school where they didn't have corporal punishment, so the sensation was quite new to him. That was why, in spite of having no sea legs, it took him less than a minute to get off that forecastle and cover the whole length of the deck and burst in at the cabin, still hotly pursued by Reepicheep. Indeed, it seemed to Eustace that the rapier as well as the pursuit was hot. It might have been red hot by the feel. There was not much difficulty in settling the matter once Eustace realized that everyone took the idea of a duel seriously, and heard Caspian offering to lend him a sword, and Drinian and Edmund discussing whether he ought to be handicapped in some way to make up for him being so much bigger than Reepicheep. He apologized sulkily and went off with Lucy to have his hand bathed and bandaged, and then went to his bunk. He was careful to lie on his side. I like the idea that Lucy was gave him medicine for seasickness, but it's like stabbed hand? Nuh-uh. You earned that. Fair play. Chapter 3, The Lone Islands. Land in sight, shouted the man in the bows. Lucy, who had been talking to Rince on the poop, came pattering down the ladder and raced forwards. As she went, she was joined by Edmund, and they found Caspian, Drinian, and Reepicheep already on the forecastle. It was a coldish morning, the sky very pale, and the sea very dark blue with little white caps of foam, and there, a little way off on the starboard bow, was the nearest of the lone islands, Belamath, like a low green hill in the sea, and behind it, further off, the grey slopes of its sister, Doorn. Same old Felamath, same old Doorn, said Lucy, clapping her hands. Oh, Edmund, how long it's since you and I saw them last. I never understood why they belonged to Narnia, said Caspian. Did Peter the High King conquer them? Oh, no, said Edmund. They were Narnian before our time, in the days of the White Witch. By the way, I have never yet heard how these remote islands became attached to the crown of Narnia. If I ever do, and if the story is at all interesting, I might put it in some other book. Oh, we never got that story. Maybe. Um, are we to put in here, sire? Asked Drinian. I shouldn't think it would be much good landing on Philomath, said Edmund. It was almost uninhabited in our days, and it looks as if it's just the same still. The people lived mostly on Durn, and a little on Avra. That's the third one. You can't see it yet. They only kept sheep on Philomath. Then we'll have to double the cape, I suppose, said Drinian, and land on Durn. That'll mean rowing. I'm sorry we're not landing on Philomath, said Lucy. I'd like to walk there again. It was so lonely, a nice kind of loneliness, and all grass and clover and soft sea air. I'd love to stretch my legs now, too, said Caspian. I'll tell you what. Why shouldn't we go ashore in the boat and send it back, and then we could walk across Philomath and let the Dawn Treader pick us up on the other side? If Caspian had been as experienced then as he became later on in this voyage, he would not have made this suggestion. But at the moment it seemed an excellent one. Oh, do let's, said Lucy. You'll come, will you? Said Caspian to Eustace, who had come on deck with his hand bandaged. Anything to get off this blasted boat, said Eustace. Blasted, said Drinian. How do you mean? In a civilized country like where I come from, said Eustace, the ships are so big that when you're inside you wouldn't know you were at sea at all. In that case, you might as well stay ashore. In that case, you might as well stay ashore, said Caspian. Will you tell them to lower the boat, Drinian? King, the mouse, and the two Pevensies and Eustace all got into the boat and were pulled to the beach of Philomath, where the boat had left them and was being rowed back. When the boat had left them and was being rowed back, they all turned and looked round. They were surprised at how small the Dawn Treader looked. Lucy was, of course, barefoot, having kicked off her shoes while swimming, but that was no hardship if one was going to walk on downy turf. It was delightful to be ashore again, and to smell the earth and grass, even if at first the ground seemed to be pitching up and down like a ship, as it usually does for a while if one has been at sea. It was much warmer here than it had been on board, and Lucy found the sand pleasant to her feet as they crossed it. There was a lark singing. They struck inland and up a fairly steep, though low, hill. At the top, of course, they looked back, and there was the Dawn Treader, shining like a great, high, bright insect, and crawling slowly northward with her oars. Then they went over the ridge and could see her no longer. So they just let everybody else row, where they're like, let's go for a walk. Everyone's like, ugh. Durn now lay before them, divided from Philomath by a channel about a mile wide. Behind it and to the left lay Avra. The little white town of Narrowhaven on Durn was easily seen. Hello, what's this? Said Edmund suddenly. In the green valley to which they were descending, 6 or 7 rough-looking men, all armed, were sitting by a tree. Don't tell them who we are, said Caspian. And pray, your majesties, why not? Said Reepicheep, who had consented to ride on Lucy's shoulder. I'm gonna pause. 1 second, I'm gonna pause. Kev. So just pause for the ad? Okay. I didn't mute that.
And we are unmuted. Ads have ended. We will resume. Lighting has been changed. Things have been done again. It has just occurred to me, replied Caspian, that no one here can have heard from Narnia for a long time. It's just possible they may not still acknowledge our overlordship, in which case it might not be quite safe to be known as the king. We have our swords, sire, said Reepicheep. Yes, Reep, I know we have, said Caspian. But if it is a question of reconquering the 3 islands, I'd prefer to come back with a rather larger army. By this time they were quite close to the strangers, one of whom, a big black-haired fellow, shouted out, "A good morning to you." "And a good morning to you," said Caspian. "Is there still a governor of the Lone Islands?" "To be sure there is," said the man. "Governor Grumpus, his sufficiency is at Narrowhaven, but he'll stay and drink with us." Caspian thanked him, though neither he nor the others much liked the look of their new acquaintance. And all of them sat down. But hardly had they raised their cups to their lips when the black-haired man nodded to his companions, and, as quick as lightning, all the 5 visitors found themselves wrapped in strong arms. There was a moment's struggle, but all the advantages were on one side, and soon everyone was disarmed and they had their hands tied behind their backs, except Reepicheep, writhing in his captor's grip and biting furiously. "Careful with the beast, Tex," said the leader. "Don't damage him. He'll fetch a best price on the lot. I shouldn't wonder." "Coward, poltroon," squeaked Reepicheep. "Give me my sword and free my paws if you dare." "Ooh," whistled the slave merchant. For that is what he was. "It can talk. Well, I never did. Blowed if I'd take less than 200 crescents for him." The Calorman crescent, which is the chief coin in those parts, is worth about 1/3 of a pound. "So that's what you are," said Caspian, "a kidnapper and slaver. I hope you're proud of it." Now, said the slaver. "Don't you start any jaw. The easier you take it, the pleasanter all round, see? I don't do this for fun. I've got my living to make some, same as anyone else." "Where will you take us?" said Lucy, getting the words out with some difficulty. "Over to Narrowhaven," said the slaver, "for market day tomorrow." "Is there a British consul there?" asked Eustace. "Is there a witch?" asked the man. But long before Eustace was tired of trying to explain, the saver simply said, "Well, I've had enough of this jabber. The mouse is a fair treat, but this one would tuck the hind legs off a donkey. Off we go, mates." Then the 4 human prisoners were roped together, not cruelly, but securely, and made to march down to the shore. Reepicheep was carried. He had stopped biting on the threat of having his mouth tied up, but he had a great deal to say, and Lucy really wondered how a man could bear to have the things said to him which were said to the slave dealer by the mouse. But the slave dealer, far from objecting, only said, "Go on," whenever Reepicheep paused for breath, occasionally adding, "It's as good as a play," or "Blimey, you can't help almost thinking it knows what it's saying," or "What, was it one of you that trained it?" This was so infuriating Reepicheep that in the end the number of things he thought of saying all at once nearly suffocated him, and he became silent. When they got down to the shore that looked towards Doorn, they found a little village and a longboat on the beach, and lying a little further out, a dirty, bed-raggled-looking ship. "Now, youngsters," said the slave dealer, "let's have no fuss, and then you'll have nothing to cry about. All aboard." At that moment, a fine-looking bearded man came out of one of the houses, an inn, I think, and said, "Well, Pug, more of your usual wares?" The slaver, whose name seemed to be Pug, bowed very low and said in a wheedling kind of voice, "Yes, if it pleases your lordship." "How much do you want for that boy?" asked the other, pointing to Caspian. "Ah," said Pug, "I knew your lordship would pike on the best. No deceiving your lordship with anything second-rate. That boy, now, I've taken a fancy to him myself. Got kind of a fond of him, I have. I'm that tender-hearted. I don't ever ought to have taken up this job. Still, to a customer like your lordship,
Tell me your price, carrion, said the Lord sternly. Do you think I want to listen to the rigmarole of your filthy trade? 300 crescents, my lord. To your honorable lordship, but to anyone else, I'll give you 150. Oh, please, please, broke in Lucy. Don't separate us, whatever you do. You don't know. But then she stopped, for she saw that Caspian didn't even now want to be known. 150 then, said the lord. And as for you, little maiden, I am sorry I cannot buy you all. Unrope my boy Pug, and look, treat these others well while they are in your hands, or it'll be worse for you. Well, said Pug, now whoever heard of a gentleman in my way of business who treats his stock better than what I do? Well, why, I treat him like my own children. That's likely enough to be true, said the other grimly. The dreadful moment had now come. Caspian was untied, and his new master said, "This way, lad." And Lucy burst into tears, and Edmund looked very blank. But Caspian looked over his shoulder and said, "Cheer up. I'm sure it'll come all right in the end. So long." Now, missy, I can't fucking do voices, said Pug. Don't you start taking on and spoiling your looks for the market tomorrow. You'll be a good girl, and then you won't have nothing to cry about, see? Then they were rowed out to the slave ship and taken below into a long, rather dark place, none too clean, where they found many other unfortunate prisoners, for Pug was, of course, a pirate, and he had just returned from cruising among the islands and capturing what he could. The children didn't meet anyone whom they knew. The prisoners were mostly Galmians and Terebinthians, and there they sat in the straw and wondered what had happened to Caspian, and tried to stop Eustace talking as if everyone except himself was to blame. Meanwhile, Caspian was having a much more interesting time. The man who had bought him led him down in a little lane between two of the village houses, and so out into an open place behind the village. Then he turned and faced him. You needn't be afraid of me, boy. I'll treat you well. I bought you for your face. You reminded me of someone. Might I ask of whom, my lord? Said Caspian. You reminded me of my master. Sorry. You reminded me of my master, King Caspian of Narnia. Then Caspian decided to risk everything on one stroke. My lord, he said, I am your master. I am Caspian, King of Narnia. You make very free, said the other. How shall I know it is true? Firstly, by my face, said Caspian. Secondly, because I know within 6 guesses who you are. Right, because there's 7 of them. You are one of those 7 lords of Narnia whom my uncle Mira sent to sea, and whom I have come to look for. Argos, Byrne, Octasian, Restamar, Mavramorn, or I've forgotten the others. And finally, if your lordship will give me a sword, I will prove on any man's body in clean battle that I am Caspian, the son of Caspian, lawful king of Narnia, lord of Cair Paravel, and emperor of the Lone Islands. By heaven, exclaimed the man, it is his father's very voice and trick of speech, my liege, your majesty. And there in the field he knelt and kissed the king's hand. The money your lordship dispersed for our person will be made good from our own treasury, said Caspian. They're not in Pug's purse yet, sire, said the Lord Byrne, for it was he, and never will be, I trust. I have moved his sufficiency the governor 100 times to crush this vile traffic in men's flesh. My Lord Byrne, said Caspian, we must talk of the state of these islands. But first, what is your lordship's own story? Short enough, sire, said Byrne. I came thus far with my 6 fellows, loved a girl on this island, and felt I had enough of the sea. There was no purpose in returning to Narnia while your majesty's uncle held the reins. So I married and lived here ever since. And what is this governor, this Grumpus, like? Does he still acknowledge the king of Narnia for his lord? In words, yes. All is done in the king's name, but he would not best be pleased to find a real, live king of Narnia coming in upon him. And if your majesty came before him, alone and unarmed, well, he would not deny his allegiance, but he would pretend to disbelieve you. Your grace's life would be in danger. What following has your majesty in these waters? There is my ship just rounding the point, said Caspian. We are about 30 swords if it came to fighting. Shall we not have my ship in and fall upon Pug, and free my friends whom he holds captive? Not by my counsel, said Byrne. As soon as there is a fight, 2 or 3 ships will put out from Narrowhaven to rescue Pug. Your Majesty must work by a show of more power than you really have, by the terror of the king's name. It must not come to plain battle. Grumpus is a chicken-hearted man who can be overawed. After a little more conversation, Caspian and Byrne walked down to the coast a little west of the village, and there Caspian winded his horn. This was not the great magic horn of Narnia, Queen Susan's horn. He had left that at home for his Regent Trumpkin to use if any great need fell upon the land in the king's absence. Drinian, who was on lookout for the signal, recognized the royal horn at once, and the Dawn Treader began sending in to shore. Then the boat put off again, and in a few moments, Caspian and the Lord Byrne were on deck, explaining the situation to Drinian. He, just like Caspian, wanted to lay the Dawn Treader alongside the slave ship at once and board her, but Byrne made the same objection. Steer straight down this channel, Captain, said Byrne, and then round to Avra, where my own estates are. But first, run up the king's banner. Hang out all the shields and send as many men to the fighting top as you can. And about 5 bow shots hence, when you get open sea on your port bow, run up a few signals. Signals? To whom? Said Drinian. Why, to all the other ships we haven't got, but which it might be well that Grumpkin thinks we have. Oh, I see, said Drinian, rubbing his hands, and they'll read our signals. What shall I say? Whole fleet round the south of Avra and assemble at Burnstead, said Lord Byrne. That'll do excellently. Their whole journey, if they were any ships, would be out of sight from Narrowhaven. Caspian was sorry for the others languishing in the hold of Pug's slave ships, but he could not help finding the rest of that day enjoyable. Late in the afternoon, for they had to do all by oar, having turned to starboard round the northeast end of Doorn and port again round the point of Avra, they entered into a good harbour on Avron's southern shore, where Byrne's pleasant lands sloped down to the water's edge. Byrne's people, many of whom they saw working in the fields, were all freemen, and it was a happy and prosperous fief. Here they all went ashore and were royally festive in a low, pillared house overlooking the bay. Byrne and his gracious wife and their merry daughters made them good cheer, but after dark Byrne sent a message over by boat to Doorn to order some preparations. He did not say exactly what for the following day. Chapter 4. What Caspian Did There. Next morning, the Lord Byrne called his guests early, and after breakfast he asked Caspian to order every man he had into full armor. And above all, he added, let everything be as trim and scoured as if it were the morning of the first battle in a great war between noble kings, with all the world looking on. This was done, and then in 3 boatloads, Caspian and his people, and Byrne with a few of his, put out for Narrowhaven. The king's flag flew in the stern of the boat, and his trumpeter was with him. When they reached the jetty at Narrowhaven, Caspian found a considerable crowd assembled to meet them. This is what I sent word about last night, said Byrne. They are friends of mine, and honest people. And as soon as Caspian stepped ashore, the crowd broke out into hoorays and shouts of Narnia, Narnia, long live the king. And at the same moment, and this was also due to Byrne's messages, bells began ringing from many parts of the town. Then Caspian caused his banner to be advanced and his trumpet to be blown. And every man drew his sword and set his face into joyful sternness. And they marched up the streets so that the streets shook and their armor shone. For it was a sunny morning, so that one could hardly look at it steadily. At first, the only people who cheered were those who had been warned by Byrne's messenger and knew what was happening and wanted it to happen. But then all the children joined in because they liked a procession and had seen very few. And then all the schoolboys joined in because they also liked a procession and felt that the more noise and disturbance there was, the less likely would be they'd have any school that morning. And then all the old women put their heads out of doors and windows and began chattering and cheering because it was a king. And what is a governor compared to that? And all of the young women joined in for the same reason, and also because Caspian and Drinian and the rest were so handsome. And then all the young men came to see what the young women were looking at, and so that by the time Caspian reached the castle gates, nearly the whole town was shouting, and where Grumpus sat in the castle, muddling and messing about with accounts and forms and rules and regulations, he heard the noise. At the castle gate, Caspian's trumpeter blew a blast and cried, "Open for the King of Narnia, come to visit his trusty and well-beloved servant, the governor of the Lone Islands." In those days, everything on the island was done in slovenly, slouching manner. Only the little postern opened, and out came a tousled fellow with a dirty old hat, and instead of a helmet, with a dirty old hat on his head instead of a helmet, and a rusty old pike in his hand. He blinked at the flashing figures before him. "Carn sees sufficiently," he mumbled, which was his way of saying, "You can't see his sufficiency. No interviews without appointments, except 29 and 10 peasant. Oh my god. No interviews without appointments, except between 9 and 10 p.m., second Saturday every month. Uncover before Narnia, you dog," thundered Lord Byrne, and dealt him a rap with a gauntlet hand, which sent his hat flying from his head. What's it all about?" began the doorkeeper, but no one took any notice of him. Two of Caspian's men stepped through the postern, and after some struggling with bars and bolts, for everything was rusty, flung both wings of the gate wide open. Then the king and his followers strode into the courtyard. Here a number of the governor's guards were lounging about, and several more, they were mostly wiping their mouths, came tumbling out of various doorways. Though their armor was in disgraceful condition, these were fellows who might have fought if they had been led or had known what was happening, so this was the dangerous moment. Caspian gave them no time to think. "Where is the captain?" he asked. "I am more or less, if you know what I mean," said a languid and rather dandified young person without any armor at all. "It is our wish," said Caspian, "that our royal visitation to our realm of the Lone Islands should, if possible, be an occasion of joy and not of terror to our loyal subjects. If it were not for that, I should have something to say about the state of your men's armor and weapons. As it is, you're pardoned, Commander. You're pardoned. Command a cask of wine to be opened, that your men may drink our health. But at noon tomorrow, I wish to see them here in this courtyard looking like men at arms and not like vagabonds. See to it on pain of our extreme displeasure." The captain gaped, but Byrne immediately cried, "3 cheers for the king!" And the soldiers who had understood about the cask of wine, even if they understood nothing else, joined in. Caspian then ordered most of his men to remain in the courtyard. He, with Byrne, Drinian, and 4 others, went into the hall. Behind a table at the far end, with various secretaries about him, sat his sufficiency. I love they call him sufficiency. Good enough. 1 second, I'm having trouble speaking, need drink. There we go. Sufficiency. There we go. Grumpus was a bilious-looking man, with hair that had once been red and was now mostly gray. He glanced up at the strangers entering and looked down at his papers, saying automatically, "No interviews without appointments, except between 9 and 10 p.m. on second Saturdays." Caspian nodded to Byrne and then stood aside. Byrne and Drinian took a step forwards and each seized one end of the table. They lifted it and flung it one side of the hall, where it rolled over, scattered a cascade of letters, dossiers, inkpots, pens, sealing wax, and documents. Then, not roughly, but as firmly as if their hands were pincers of steel, they plucked Grumpus out of his chair and deposited him facing it about 4 feet away. Caspian at once sat down in the chair and laid his naked sword across his knees. "My lord," said he, fixing his eyes on Grumpus, "you have not given us quite the welcome we expected. I am the king of Narnia." "Nothing about it in the correspondence," said the governor. "Nothing in the minutes. We have not been notified of any such thing. All are regular, happy to consider any applications, and we have come to inquire into your sufficiency's conduct of your office," continued Caspian. "There are 2 points especially on which I require an explanation. Firstly, I find no record that the tribute due from these islands to the Crown of Narnia has been received for about 150 years. "That would be a question to raise at the council next month," said Grumpus. "If anyone moves that a commission of inquiry be set up to report on the financial history of the island at the first meeting next year, why then, I also find it very clearly written in our laws," Caspian went on, "that if the tribute is not delivered, the whole debt has to be paid by the governor of the Lone Islands out of his private purse." At this, Grumpus began to pay real attention. "Oh, that's quite out of the question," he said. "It is an economic impossibility. Your Majesty must be joking." Inside, he was wondering if there were any way of getting rid of these unwelcome visitors. He had known that Caspian had only one ship. Had he known that Caspian only had one ship and one ship's company with him, he would have spoken soft words for the moment, and hoped to have all of them surrounded and killed during the night. But he had seen a ship of war sail down the straits yesterday, and had seen it signaling, as he supposed, to its consorts. He had not then known it was the king's ship. There was not wind enough to spread the flag out and make the golden lion visible, so he had waited further developments. Now he imagined that Caspian had a whole fleet at Burnstead. It would never have occurred to Grumpus that anyone would walk into Narrowhaven to take the islands with fewer than 50 men. It was certainly not at all the kind of thing he would imagine doing himself. "Secondly," said Caspian, "I want to know why you've permitted this abominable and unnatural traffic in slaves to grow up here, contrary to the ancient custom and usage of our dominions." "Necessary and unavoidable," said his sufficiency. "An essential part of the economic development of the islands, I assure you. Our present burst of prosperity depends on it." "What need have you of slaves?" "For export, your Majesty. Sell them to colormen mostly, and we have other markets. We are a great center of the trade." "In other words," said Caspian, "you do not need them. Tell me what purpose they serve except to put money in the pockets of such as Pug." "Your Majesty's tender years," said Grumpus, with what was meant to be a fatherly smile, "hardly make it possible that you should understand the economic problems involved. I have statistics, I have graphs, I have—" "Tender as my years may be," said Caspian, "I believe I understand the slave trade from within quite as well as your sufficiency. And I do not see that it brings into the islands meat or bread or beer or wine or timber or cabbages or books or instruments of music or horses or armor or anything else worth having. Whether it does or does not, it must be stopped." "But that would be putting the clock back," gasped the governor. "Have you no idea of progress, of development?" "I have seen them both in an egg," said Caspian. "We call it going bad in Narnia. This trade must stop." "I can take no responsibility for any such measures," said Grumpus. "Very well, then," answered Caspian. "We relieve you of your office. My Lord Byrne, come here." Before Grumpus quite realized what was happening, Byrne was kneeling with his hands between the king's hands, and taking the oath to govern the Lone Islands in accordance with the old customs, rights, usages, and laws of Narnia. And Caspian said, "I think we have had enough of governors," and made Byrne a duke, the Duke of the Lone Islands. As for you, my lord," said Grumpus. He said to Grumpus, "I forgive you of your debt for the tribute, but before noon tomorrow, you and yours must be out of the castle, which is now the Duke's residence." "Look here, this is all very well," said one of Grumpus' secretaries, "but suppose all you gentlemen stop play acting and we do a little business. The question before us really is—" The question is," said the Duke, Whether you and the rest of the rabble will leave without a flogging or with one, you may choose which you prefer." When all this had been pleasantly settled, Caspian ordered horses, of which there were a few in the castle, though very ill-groomed, and he, with Byrne and Drinian and a few others, rode out of the town and made for the slave market. It was a long, low building near the harbor, and the scene which they found going on the island was very much like any other auction. That is to say, there was a great crowd, and Pug, on a platform, was roaring out in raucous voice, "Now, gentlemen, lot 23, fine Terebinthians, agricultural laborers, suitable for the mines or the galleys, under 25 years of age, not a bad tooth in his head, good brawny fellow. Take off his shirt, tax, let the gentleman see. There's muscle for you. Look at the chest on him. 10 crescents from the gentleman in the corner. You must be joking, sir. 15, 18. 18 is bid for lot 23. Any advance on 18? 21. Thank you, sir. 21 is a bid." But Pug stopped and gaped when he saw the mail-clad figures who had clanked up at the platform. "On your knees, every man of you, to the King of Narnia," said the Duke. Everyone heard the horses jingling and stamping outside, and many had heard some rumor of the landing and the events at the castle. Most obeyed. Those who did not were pulled down by their neighbors. Some cheered. "Your life is forfeit, Pug, for laying hands on our royal person yesterday," said Caspian, "but your ignorance is pardoned. The slave trade was forbidden in all our dominions quarter of an hour ago. I declare every slave in this market free." He held up his hands to check the cheering of the slaves and went on, "Where are my friends?" "That dear girl and the nice young gentleman," said Pug with an ingratiating smile. "Why, they were snapped up at once." We're here, Caspian," cried Lucy and Edmund together. And at your service, sire," piped Reepicheep from another corner. They had been sold, but the men who had bought them were staying to bid for other slaves, and so they had not yet been taken away. The crowd parted to let the three of them out, and there was great clasping and greeting between them and Caspian. 2 merchants of Calormen at once approached. Calormen have dark faces and long beards. They were flowing robes and orange-colored turbans, and they are a wise, wealthy, courteous, cruel, and ancient people. They bowed most politely to Caspian and paid him long compliments, and all about the fountains of prosperity and ingratiating the gardens of prudence and virtue, and things like that. But of course, what they wanted was the money they had paid. "That is only fair, sirs," said Caspian. "Every man who has bought a slave today must have his money back. Pug, bring out your takings to the last minimum. A minimum is the 40th part of a crescent." "Does your good majesty mean to beggar me?" whined Pug. "You have lived on broken hearts all your life," said Caspian, "and if you are beggared, it is better to be a beggar than a slave. But where is my other friend?" "Oh, him," said Pug. "Oh, take him and be welcome. Glad to have him off my hands. I never seen such a drug in the market in all my born days. Priced him at 5 crescents in the end, and even so nobody's have him. Threw him in free with the other lots, and still nobody would have him. Wouldn't touch him, wouldn't look at him. Tax, bring out Sulky. Tax, bring out Sulky." Thus Eustace was produced, and Sulky certainly looked. For though no one would want to be sold as a slave, it is perhaps even more galling to be a sort of utility slave whom nobody will buy. He walked up to Caspian and said, "I see, as usual, been enjoying yourself somewhere while the rest of us were prisoners. I suppose you haven't even found out about the British Council." "Of course not." That night they had a great feast in the castle of Narrowhaven. And then, "Tomorrow for the beginning of our real adventure," said Reepicheep, when he had made his bows to everyone and went to bed. But it could not really be tomorrow or anything like it, for now they were preparing to leave all known lands and seas behind them, and the fullest preparations had to be made. The Dawn Treader was emptied and drawn on land by 8 horses on 8 horses over rollers, and every bit of her was gone over by most skilled shipwrights. Then she was launched again and victualled and watered as full as she could hold. That is to say, for 28 days. Even this, as full as she could, even this, Edmund noticed, was with disappointment. Only gave them a fortnight's eastward sailing before they had to abandon their quest. While all this was being done, Caspian missed not a chance of questioning all the oldest sea captains whom he could find in Narrow Haven to learn if they had any knowledge or even any rumors of lands farther to the east. He poured out many a flagon to the castle ale to weather-beaten men with short grey beards and clear blue eyes, and many a tall yarn he heard in return. But those who seemed the most truthful could tell of no lands beyond the Lone Islands, and many thought that if you sailed too far east, you would come into the surges of a sea without lands that swirled perpetually round the rim of the world. And that, I reckon, is where your Majesty's friends went to the bottom. The rest had only wild stories of islands inhabited by headless men, floating islands, waterspouts, and a fire that burned along the water. Only one, to Reepicheep's delight, said, and beyond that, Aslan's country. But that's beyond the end of the world, and you can't get there. But when they questioned him, he would only say that he'd heard of it from his father. Byrne could only tell them that he had seen his 6 companions sail away eastward, and that nothing had ever been heard of them again. He said this when he and Caspian were standing on the highest point of Avra, looking down on the eastern ocean. "I've often been up here of a morning," said the Duke, "and seen the sun coming up over the sea, and sometimes it looked as if it was only a couple miles away. And I've wondered about my friends, and wondered what there really is behind the horizon. Nothing, most likely. Yet I am always half ashamed that I stayed behind. But I wish your Majesty wouldn't go. We may need your help here. This closing the slave market might make a new world war. My God. This closing the slave market might make a new world war? What the hell? There's like a semicolon right after world. Might make a new world. War with Callerman is what I foresee. Okay. My liege, think again. I have an oath, my Lord Duke, said Caspian. And anyway, what could I say to Reepicheep? I think we'll get through chapter 5 and I might call it tonight. I'm struggling. So, chapter 5, The Storm and What Came of It. It was nearly 3 weeks after their landing that the Dawn Treader was towed out of Narrowhaven Harbor. Very solemn farewells had been spoken, and a great crowd had assembled to see her departure. There had been cheers and tears, too, when Caspian made his last speech to the Lone Islanders, and parted from the Duke and his family. But as the ship, her purple sails still flapping idly, drew farther from the shore, with the sound of Caspian's trumpet from the poop came fainter across the water. Everyone became silent. Then she came into the wind. The sails swelled out, the tug cast off and began rowing back. The first real wave ran up under the Dawn Treader's prow, and she was a live ship again. The men off duty went below. Dornian took the first watch on the poop, and she turned her head eastward round the south of Avra. The next few days were delightful, Lucy thought she was the most fortunate girl in the world as she woke each morning to see the reflections of the sunlit water dancing on the ceiling of her cabin, and looked round on all the nice new things she had got in the Lone Islands. Sea boots and buskins and cloaks and jerkins and scarves. And then she would go on deck and take a look from the forecastle and at sea, which was brighter blue each morning, and drink in an air that was a little warmer day by day. And after that came breakfast, and such an appetite as one only has at sea. She spent a good deal of time sitting on the little bench in the stern, playing chess with Reepicheep. It was amusing to see him lifting the pieces, which were far too big for him, with both paws, and standing on tiptoe if he made a move near the center of the board. He was a good player, and when he remembered what he was doing, he usually won. But every now and then Lucy won because the mouse did something quite ridiculous, like sending a knight into danger of a queen and castle combined. This happened because he had momentarily forgotten it was a game of chess, and was thinking of a real battle, and making the knight do what he would certainly have done in his place. For his mind was full of forlorn hopes, death or gloried charges, and last stands. But this pleasant time did not last. There came an evening when Lucy, gazing idly astern at the long furrow or wake that they were leaving behind them, saw a great rack of clouds building itself up in the west with amazing speed. Then a gap was torn in it, and a yellow sunset poured through the gap. All the waves behind them seemed to take on an unusual shapes, and the sea was drab. It was a drab or yellowish color, like a dirty canvas. The air grew cold. The ship seemed to move uneasily, as if she felt danger behind her. The sail would be flat and limp one minute, then wildly full the next. While she was noting these things and wondering at a sinister change which had come over the very noise of the wind, grinning. While she was wondering at a sinister change which had come over the very noise of the wind, Vernier cried, "All hands on deck!" In a moment, everyone became frantically busy. The hatches were battened down. The galley fire was put out. Men went, "I can't do this. I'm sorry." I think next week we're going to have to find a different setup because this new one is not working. I'm sorry for everyone. I'm calling this short. I will come back next week. We'll do a more proper reading till midnight. But I do appreciate everybody who came to tune in for this, and we'll pick up on the storm and what continues on with the islands later. I hope everybody's having a good evening, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of the week. Take care.